So I want to instill that work ethic for my children. I want them to be passionate about things, but I also want them to know that sometimes you're going to fail, even if you work hard. But what are we going to do? We're going to have a growth mindset. We're going to figure out what we can do differently for next time.
A parent's intuition is so important.
And I think what happens so much is that, especially in this modern era of so much information, we forget that it's actually too much information.
This was a big one for me. Being afraid of their kids crying or being upset.
Let's use screen time again. Use crying for an iPad. And you give them the iPad when they're crying. You have now done two things. You've now reinforced that crying will get me what I want. And then it also teaches them lack of emotional regulation.
What's something that you're grateful for?
To be able to impart knowledge and help others is probably one of the biggest things I'm grateful for in this world, because I know it's going to leave a legacy after I'm gone.
Hi, and welcome to Common Denominator, a podcast about growth and mindset. I'm Moshe Popack, and today we talk with Dr. Mona Amin. Dr. Mona is a board-certified pediatrician and the host of PedsDocTalk, one of the top parenting podcasts. Dr. Mona will share the 5 biggest mistakes parents make, discuss the merits of no blame, no shame parenting, and so much more. If you enjoy the Common Denominator podcast, we'd be grateful for a like and subscribe. Whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else, it really helps promote the show and helps us get great guests. Thank you so much. And now here's my conversation with Dr. Mona. Hi, Dr. Mona, and welcome to the Common Denominator podcast.
Thank you for having me. Happy we could do this.
And before we start, I want to say thank you so much, because I was on your show a couple months ago, and I really enjoyed that. So thank you.
Yeah, well, you taught me so much having your experience with 11 children, and I just loved hearing that perspective, and I'm so happy to return the favor and come on your show and talk about all things parenting, mindful parenting, all of that.
So what would you say, and I want to go through each of these because this is very important for you, like the 5 biggest mistakes that parents make. And maybe we can go through each one.
Yeah.
Not holding important boundaries. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think to start off this conversation, it's so important to remember that we are all doing our best and learning as we go. I don't think anyone knows exactly what they're doing, and I like to be clear on that, not only on this episode, but also on my platform, right? Because sometimes, especially this modern parenting, the ones that are going online to get advice, whether it's Googling or social media, we tend to focus so much on, well, I got to say the right thing, and I got to do the right thing, and if I don't do it this way, I'm going to F my kids up, which is not what we want to do, right? We want to really remember that we are doing our best. And so when I talk about that first one, which is not holding important boundaries, the key word is important boundaries. So not everything needs to be a boundary. I think what we're dealing with right now is that parents are so afraid to make their kid upset or kind of be the fun parent that they don't hold really important things that need to happen. They become a little more permissive. And then on the flip side, I see some parents who become a little bit more authoritarian, where it's like my way or the highway. We're not finding that balance that you and your wife seem to have found, which is, what are the things that are really important to me as a family? What are things that are not important boundaries? And so I use the example of my kid needing to wash his hands. To me as a pediatrician, hand washing is extremely important. It's the way we reduce germs. And yeah, I have a 4.5-year-old. Sometimes he does not want to wash his hands. But does that mean that I say, okay, sweetie, then you don't have to wash your hands? No. Using this example, it's an important boundary for me and my husband, meaning before we eat, after we play, we're going to wash our hands. So if he doesn't want to, we give him an option and say, hey, sweetie, I see that you don't want to wash your hands, but it's time to eat dinner and you're going to have to wash your hands before. You can either walk there yourself or I can help you there. You decide which one, right? And so I'm giving him a choice of how he wants to get there, but the boundary is still mine, right? That you need to wash your hands. You can figure out how you want to make that happen. And it's so important because now he's a 4.5-year-old and he knows like clockwork that I need to come home, wash my hands if I'm going to get a snack. Before dinner, I'm going to wash my hands. And it starts early to set those boundaries, right? And I'm using hand washing as one example, but think about anything that you deem important as a parent, right? And you and your partner have to come together to decide which are the important boundaries that I really want to hold overall. And that's usually going to come from your value set, right? That, yeah, hand washing is part of my value set for hygiene. toothbrushing is part of my value set. Minimizing screen time is part of our value set. It doesn't mean that he can never watch screens, but I don't want him sitting in front of the TV for 5 hours, that there's going to be an expectation and a boundary. And my kids know that we are going to hold strong with that boundary. So what that means is if I say it's done, it's done. And it's not a authoritarian thing. It's well, I told you that we're going to watch four episodes of Bluey, his favorite show right now, which are like 8-minute episodes. And I'm going to let you watch this. And then when the 4th episode is done, you're going to turn it off. And we turn it off. So I'm following through with the boundary that's important to me. And the reason why I think this is so key is that it leads to a huge amount of trust from your child. The child brain really needs to know that the person who's giving them rules is going to be true to their word and also respect them as well. So my son loves cartoons. So I throw it in there. I'm not going to say you can never watch it, you can never have a cookie, you can never have this. He loves those things because they're enjoyable. But by allowing him to have permission to do these things, but also being very clear on expectations, he trusts me. He learns to know that mom is going to follow her word. He doesn't whine as much with me. He doesn't complain as much because he knows that there's this big blend here of here's the boundary, here's the expectation from you, here's what's going to happen, and there's clear understanding of that.
I love what you said earlier before about the choice. I felt that's so good when you give your child, in other words, you're going to get the result.
Yes.
But in their mind, you're giving them like autonomy, like, okay, by the way, you're 4.5-year-old. By the way, in other words, you could go wash your hands, you could do it this way, or you could do it that way. And they're like, wow.
I have the
freedom,
choice.
right?
Yeah.
That idea of choice, it was like this aha moment that I had. I was like, oh, this is great. Okay. Because in the end, you get what you're going to get. It doesn't have to be constant struggle. That was a very important aha moment. And then for years, I would say things and I wouldn't follow through.
Yeah.
And then it would be, and there would just be escalation. My wife would get upset. The kids would get upset. And then the shift because you love your child, but it's like, no, by the way, I don't care. Yeah. And now I'm getting it like just yesterday, my 18, 6-year-old, they were going at it, and you just always maintain your composure. Oh my God, he did this, he did that. An hour later, they're like best friends again.
Yes.
Right?
So much of that. I mean, and it's so much about our reaction too. I mean, that's not even one of the biggest mistakes, but like how we respond to a power struggle is huge, right? I have a very strong-willed 4.5-year-old, and I'm strong-willed. And so and I think about my childhood, and I think about how if I had a parent who knew how to handle a strong-willed child, which meant learning when to step back and not getting into a yelling match, right? You're never going to win if you get into a power struggle with a kid. What I mean is that the escalation with a child who has an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex is not going to go anywhere. They're not going to calm down first. We have to be the ones to say, I'm just going to take this moment and just let the emotions ride, right? If they're upset about the hand washing, if they're upset with their sibling, like you said, that I'm not going to be the referee so much. I'm just going to be a spectator and just sort of narrate what's happening and say, I see what you're feeling, but this is what's happening.
By the way, and that was also for parents to understand because the whole thing is, what do? We make action based on our mind.
Yeah.
So, right, the frontal cortex is not developed, right? Parents should understand that. Like, no, I'm 44. They're 4 years old. They don't understand what the story is. So you just have to realize where you are and they are. And this is, right, to understand that. That also took me a while to finally understand that and appreciate where they're. This was a big one for me. Being afraid of their kids crying or being upset.
Yes.
Right.
Listen, this goes back to the boundary thing. And that's why I put it as the second one, because what I see a lot of, even including in my office, is that a family will not want to hold a boundary because they're just afraid of their kid being upset and crying. Using an example of a kid wanting juice. I mean, there's so many examples. Juice, screen time, something, like whatever it is. And then they're afraid of the emotions, whether it's in public or whether it's in private. And they give the thing that they did not want to give. So just say your kid is crying, let's use screen time again, crying for an iPad, and you give them the iPad when they're crying. You have now done two things. You've now reinforced that crying will get me what I want, which is not how we communicate, right? True. Tears are okay, but it doesn't change behavior, right? Yeah. Tears are a release, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to change my behavior to give you what you want. And then it also teaches them lack of emotional regulation, right? That I'm just going to cry and my parent's going to stick something in front of me to regulate. when the only thing that a child needs for regulation is either self-regulation or co-regulation with a parent. That is why this is so huge for me, right? So when we start to fear emotions and fear that they're going to be upset, that, well, my kid doesn't want to brush their teeth. Well, they have to. I mean, it's part of hygiene, right? They're gonna get cavities. It's good for them. You got to think again, going back to the important boundaries. What is it that you're trying to accomplish with your child? And it's okay if they don't love the boundary, but is this an important boundary for their well-being, for their safety, for their health, for their development? And if so, we're going to follow through with that, understanding that their emotions are not going to sway us. Because when our emotions start to sway us, that's when we don't become the effective boundary setter. That's when we start to go down that slippery slope of, well, fine, just take it, do whatever you want. That we're not that strong, sturdy leader that our kids need us to be, you know?
It's always that being in public.
The public is hard.
The public is hard. The kid's freaking out. You're in the supermarket, right? But that's the level where like the mastery comes in. Okay, everyone's watching, kids freaking out. You're like, okay. No, you're not gonna, and you stick to that. That's the key. It's funny, when we had our first child, he was 1 year old. We went to the pediatrician, and this was like that aha moment again. It's like he went and destroyed the doctor's office. He went around, and the doctor was just sitting there watching. And my wife was like, "Oh my God, we're like so," and I was like, "This is great. This is the way it should be." And all doctors should be exactly this way.
Oh yeah,
right?
Most of us we're so used to it, right? I mean, it's fun, like anything that happens in my office, whether it's a kid throwing something in my face accidentally or purposely or coming up to give me a hug on my leg. I mean, there's so much lack of personal space in the doctor's office and just stuff that we've seen it all. But yeah, I mean, that's a prime example. And I know public tantrums are harder because of the fear of judgment, right? You don't want people to think that you don't know how to quote unquote handle your child or know what to do. But I always say, think of what you would do in a private setting, right? And take that outside. Can you make an exception because you just need to get through the cash register?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That goes back to that balance, right? Sometimes we have, done that. And it's more so that it's the exception and not the rule. And so thinking about that in terms of, okay, well, normally we do this, but this one time, fine, I'm just going to quote unquote cave. That's fine. But that's not what we normally do here. And it's just an exception and we're going to move on. I really like
the third one because today in society, the world is tough. Mm-hmm. The world is tough, and if you're going to train, because we're a product, right, of what our child, what we're training, you're going to train, and as a parent, that anytime there be close to failure or some risk, right, and you're going to rescue them, right, which is very hard for a child, right? They're them, you're you. Eventually, they grow up and they become adults, and you have the opportunity to train them in a healthy way. So if every time that they have an issue, they come to you and you rescue them, that's not good. Right. And what that teaches them, and such a hard balance, because of course, early on from a developmental perspective, our kids need us more, right? When you think about those early childhood years, but what we're trying to lay as a foundation that's going to serve them for the rest of their life. And it's, for me, I call it autonomy intervention. What I mean by that is, what can my kid do for themselves developmentally appropriately, right? And when will I intervene? So if your little kid is doing a puzzle and getting frustrated, rather than swooping in and starting to do the puzzle for them, coaching them through, right? Okay, why don't we try turning the piece? This is an example of a kid showing an emotion of failure, being upset, and us trying to help them get through that, And that's going to be something that is going to serve them the rest of their life, right? They're going to go to school. They're going to get bad grades. They're going to have a peer that doesn't like them. These are all, failure, if you think about it, to the eyes of a child. But it's about coping skills and it's about resiliency and what do you think we can do differently? Not what do I think you can do differently. It's what do you think first? And that is how you can approach it in every aspect, every age, versus always coming up with a solution for them. And if they're lost, then you can guide them. Yeah, I think of, as an add to that, I think if parents realize that you let them, stay in that space as long as they can, because in the end, I think the greatest skill set in today is that grit and resilience, right? Because the things that are valuable and worth anything takes time, and 100% of the time there's going to be failures along the way. So if any one failure, I'm dealing with that with my older kids. If any one failure happens, I quit. You quit. That's ridiculous.
Right.
Right. That happens. Let's say you set a high goal. okay, so 100% that you're going to fail. So I think that that parents would do much better just allowing things to be and just listen, being a good listener.
Yeah,
actually.
and there's a saying that says you're not allowed to quit unless it's a good day, right? Like just say your kid is not doing well in a sport that they've signed up for and it's a bad day, right? Like that they didn't do well. You say, okay, well, let's see how a really good day goes and see how you feel after that good day. Because sometimes we want to quit when things are not going well, but when we look at things that are actually going well in that situation, we're going to see, hey, actually, I do like this sport or I do like this activity, and quitting is not always the answer. Is it sometimes? Yes, but that's part of us raising, these resilient kids that understand what are my needs? What do I need to do here? And how am I going to just bounce back from failure, and that's a huge thing for children to learn.
And I really appreciate also the fourth idea, which is it took me many years in my marriage to realize a mother's instinct, like the intuition.
Yeah.
You talk about on the fourth point about the idea that don't listen to all the outside stuff. You're the mother or the father, right? You know your child, right? He's going to do well with this or that. That intuition, a parent's intuition is so important.
And I think what happens so much is that, especially in this modern era of so much information, we forget that it's actually too much information, right? You go online, you listen to these podcasts, which but you do all of these things and you think, okay, well, this is how it's supposed to be. And when you don't do it that way, you start to feel like a failure. But more importantly is that you just start to lose what your value set is, right? Going back to what it is, what do you want to raise your child with? What are the values? What type of child do you want to raise in this world? And when you start hearing, well, don't do this, and if you do this, you're harming, when there's no evidence, there's a complete lack, there's a lot of lack of evidence in so many different parenting strategies, right? Some things we know that you're not supposed to do, like, hitting your child, but there's so much that is up to nuance, right? There's so much gray area because parenting is not one thing at a time. It's a combination of so many different things happening at once that it's so important to kind of say, who are the people I want to listen to? Who are my trusted experts that I want to go to, whether that's a pediatrician, a really good friend, but then drowning out the noise of people who don't elevate you in a positive way or are not uplifting realists, right? I use that term to describe people who are positive forces in your world that are also going to tell you how it really is, right? Not rah, rah, shish, boom, bah all day, but like, hey, I think you're a little anxious or I think you're a little upset about this. What can we do? And how can I support you so that you can really tap into that intuition that I know all of us have? Parenting has been done for centuries. It's not new, but we tend to forget it when we start to listen to too many people's opinions.
And I love that idea because, for thousands of years, women would just go out in the field and you just think, right, just give birth and that's
then
it, go back to work, right?
Yeah.
And now we have all these things that are going on and I'm like, right? Because I had, I guess, 8 or 9 of my 11 kids were home birth. Yeah. Something like that. Right, and that was just my wife's intuition. She felt, a woman has to feel how they feel and comfortable. But a lot of the stuff, if you're a healthy woman, do whatever feels good. What makes sense. So, and the fifth one, which I struggled a lot with, which is, because we're a product of our childhood, is don't bring that in to the next generation, to where you are. What are tools for that? Like, how do you parent without bringing your stuff in?
And that is, to me, the most important one, which is why I put it as the last one, right? Because when we bring in our insecurities, we're more likely to pass on those insecurities, whether it's about the way we look, whether it's about academics, whether it's about how success was defined for us. There's so many different things that are brought in for us that it's not that everything our parents did was bad, but you got to take the good and leave the bad from your childhood. And so the first step is having insight into remembering that none of us are perfect and that as a parent, you're going to continue to reparent yourself, right? That you're going to parent this child, but you're also going to look at the things that did not serve you in your childhood, even if you had the most amazing parents. Maybe your parents were a little bit too strict on something, or maybe they didn't give physical affection as much as you'd want. So you got to parent your child looking at your child as how you would have wanted to be parented when you were a kid, right? The things that were lacking. What were those things that were lacking for you? How can you make that show up with your child? What were the things that were done well? Using my example, my parents instilled a very strong work ethic for me and my husband both. We both had different parents, but it was an immigrant mindset. It was like, you got to work hard. Academics are important. But on the flip side, failure was not an option. And so when we started to fail in life, because that's going to happen, we were never taught how to fail and pick ourselves back up. And that's something I had to learn as an adult. So I want to instill that work ethic for my children. I want them to be passionate about things, but I also want them to know that sometimes you're going to fail, even if you work hard. But what are we going to do? We're going to have a growth mindset. We're going to figure out what we can do differently for next time. What is it that you could have done better? What is it that you did that maybe would not have been a great idea, right? Rather than, feeling like a failure, that everyone fails. And so that's why those things are so important to me. But in order to do that, you have to have insight. You have to know that you're not perfect. And you have to be willing to grow alongside your child and say, you're going to learn, and that I'm humble enough to know that I need to learn too. I used to have a really bad temper. And that's something I got from my father. And I remember when we had a puppy, I would get mad at the puppy and start yelling. And I was like, this isn't going to work when I have children. So before we even had children, I went through a path of really learning to control my temper. A temper has no place in any relationship. It doesn't. And so I started to really channel that energy and do a lot of self-work, mindfulness meditation, yoga, things like that, to really get more centered and say, okay, I can manifest my frustrations and anger in a different way, not like how I was modeled it as a child. So that took introspection, insight, and a little bit of humility. And now I'm really proud of myself. I give myself a little pat on the back when a situation that my father would have yelled, I'm not yelling at my son. I'm like, yes, growth. I love it.
No, but it doesn't come off. It doesn't come off at all.
Yeah, well, I've changed so much.
Yeah.
Like my husband even sees it like I'm happier because I'm not as angry. And and that's just who my dad was. And that's what I talk about. He was a loving father. He just didn't have those coping skills that I want to now say, I can do that. I'm going to show my children that I am capable of change, just like they will be at in their 30s or 40s, that we're all human and that change is possible. And it's not that we have to be stagnant, but we can grow.
And I love that, learning alongside your child. Yeah. I definitely believe that each one of my children forced me, right, because I'm the father, so that's just what it is, to grow and learn. And it overlapped into business and other areas of my life, for sure. For sure.
I think people forget that parenting is not just about parenting, right? It's about becoming a better person. And I will say the same thing, that having these children has made me a better pediatrician, right? Has made me a better wife, and it just has made me a happier person. And I know not everyone may feel that way about parenting, but I do. I think it really changes you. And if you choose to look at it as a positive, it can change you in a positive way.
And I saw recently people in America, and it was actually kind of sad for me, but people, it's the least amount of babies being born last year than the past 50 or 80 years. First of all, why do you think that's so?
I think it's so hard, especially in a place like America, because the cost of, there's a cost factor, right? And I think about also just childcare. Childcare is very expensive. Housing costs. I mean, those are your basic things that when our parents, were raising us, that wasn't huge costs. Like I talked to my mom and she tells me that she paid some lady $5 a week to babysit me and my sister. And I'm like, $5 a week is not going to happen. And this was a legitimate daycare, out of her house. And so, you think about that and you think about how there is a cost aspect and people are very cognizant of that. Fertility rates are also impacted, right? People are having children much later, meaning women who went through schooling, whether it's graduate school or, any type of extended schooling. And so they're having kids later. Fertility rates are an issue. But when it's coming from a choice, many parents are concerned about just the climate of cost. And we're talking about the bigger cost, right? And then having to put these children through schooling and all of that. But I think there is a trade-off here. I mean, how I look at raising children is hopefully raising, children who are kind, who love, who learn about their value, who learn about their self-worth, and who really take on the world, as positive members of society, right? That we are a team here, that this is not a me, me, me mentality. This is I'm going to be in this world. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to whatever career I end up deciding to do, but I'm going to follow my passions and treat the world with respect so that I get respect in return. But it's such a hard decision. It's such a personal one. And I can tell you, having gone through traumatic deliveries, I know that a mom may be, hesitant, whether they are scared of pregnancy or, they go through various things that make them feel like, I don't know if I want to even add to my family if they have one child or even take that step, And so it's such a multifactorial thing that I think is impacting our society. And I, as a pediatrician, I hope that's not the case because I love seeing my little kids. But I hope that people can understand the perspective of what's important to them.
But I would like to talk a little bit about the long-term benefits of having children because right in the media and everywhere, the negative, and I understand the financial and all that. What would you feel is the number one, like you having your two children, what is the number one reason that you feel that it's better than not having those children?
I am so proud of the people they're becoming. And I know they're only little. Like at this time of this recording, I have a 15-month-old and almost 5-year-old. But I just see the way that they're exploring the world, and I see all the things that maybe didn't go right in my childhood, and I see my son understand his emotions. So from a child development perspective, I just see this amazing human being that I get to be responsible for in a non-scary way. Like it's not scary to me; it's empowering. To me, it's such a honor to be able to raise a child and say, I'm going to help you through this world, that I'm going to make sure that you know your worth, that you know how to interact with the world depending on your development, all of that. And I'm going to help you and I'm going to be the one by your side. And so that is such a rewarding feeling to just see this child grow up. And he's little, right? He's not, I don't know what he's going to become, what he's going to do career-wise. To me, that doesn't matter. I just see this amazing human being that's kind, respectful, that loves to have fun, that is so in tune with his feelings. And I'm like, yes, we did that. Like we're doing that. And we're raising this beautiful child in this world. And my daughter's going to follow suit.
It probably connects so much with, talk a lot on the show about meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And it probably, as a mom, it's like, wow, like it fills you, right?
It does, like
more than a lot of other things.
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this amazing, platform. I work clinically. I'm a wife. I'm a friend. But the children and how I get to look at them and see how they're looking at the world, right? We talked about travel at the beginning. When I see them explore even a park or even my little girl looking at a leaf or something for the first time, and I get to be a part of that and say, wow, she's taking in this world, and it's not just a leaf. It's something new and exciting for her, and seeing her eyes get so sparkled up, and my son just gets so happy when he listens to his favorite song. It is the biggest joy in my life. I have so many joy sparkers in my world, but I love it. I love seeing them. I love seeing them grow, and I love the love that they give me in return. And it's really that reciprocity, that it's an unconditional love. And I hope parents understand that you're not a parent to be conditional with your love. It's unconditional, in that they may make mistakes, but so do you. And I would want the same from my son, that if I yell or make a mistake, that he would say, Mommy, I love you. And he does that randomly. He'll just say, I love you so much. Why? Because you're the kindest mommy. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Did someone pay you to say that? Those moments are just so rewarding to feel. And I share that with you, that love amidst all the bickering between siblings or I don't want to do this. There's so much love there. Yeah. And I just love filling our home with that.
I appreciate you sharing that. I relate to that so much. I know you have this concept you talk a lot about, no blame, no shame. So what does that mean for you?
Yeah, so for children, I think it's so important to raise them with this understanding that even though they're going to make mistakes, that they're not the person, that they're not responsible for everything that goes wrong in the world, right? I was raised with a lot of shame, and my husband as well. What I mean by that is, we talked about with education, right? That if you don't do well, that it's on you, that you failed, and failure is not an option. No blame, no shame talks about this mentality of like, hey, you're going to not get everything right. You're not going to be perfect. And perfectionism is not what I need you to be. I need you to have this mindset that, how am I going to go through life and learn from my mistakes? How am I going to go through and get through these things without me being the one to shame you and blame you every step of the way. So if your child, going back to the early years, if your child's not learning how to potty train and you're starting to say, well, you're not supposed to poop here, or you pooped on the floor, bad. Like you're making them feel bad about a process. You're making them feel upset about a process. That's going to fill them with shame and blame of their like, well, that's how it is. Or if you start blaming them for how you respond to tantrums. So for example, if your child yells and you're like, well, you made me act this way. You're telling your child that they're now responsible for everyone else's emotions when they're going to have feelings. But as the adult in the relationship, you have to say, well, I got mad because I got mad. I didn't get mad because you did this. Yes, they did do that. But the blame comes when we say, well, your actions and because you did this, I'm acting this way, so you need to watch that. When we're in control of our emotions, we're in control of our reactions as adults, and in order for them to learn that as well, they need to do the same thing, right? That they need to be modeled that I am going to make a mistake. I yelled, and I'm going to take ownership and say, yeah, I yelled because I was frustrated, not because you did something bad. I yelled because I was upset. And that's how we can remove that blame. And these are, I could do a whole another episode about no blame, no shame, I know, but it's so key.
I'll tell you something. Also, a game changer was the difference between you're bad and also that's a bad action.
Yes.
That's a super important for parents, right? Like that, you're a great kid. We love you. You're the best. We can't overpraise.
Yeah.
But, we love you. But what you did right there, that's not good. That action is no good. So specifically, right? Because otherwise they're going to internalize it and it's going to sit with them. And as an adult, you're going to be sitting years unpackaging that.
Yeah.
And so you want to avoid that. And you want confident, strong kids.
Correct. And that's the goal, right? I mean, and to me, confidence is not being cocky, right? There's a difference. Cocky is that I'm infallible. I'm not going to ever make a mistake. Confidence is that I know what I know and that I'm not perfect and that there's going to be mistakes, but I know how to bounce back from mistakes. That to me is a confident adult, a confident child that we're not alone in this world. We're going to need help, even if your children are in their 20s, 30s. I hope that if you create a secure relationship, and that's what I'm striving for my two children, that even when they let go of my hand, right, even though I'm not going to be holding their hand their entire life, that they know that they have a safe space with me. That if they mess up, if something happens, they know that, you know what, I made a mistake. I'm going to go to my mom rather than run away from her because that's what I did, right? I didn't blame them. I didn't shame them. It was hey, how are we going to learn from this? What are we going to do here? And it starts so early with, preschool and school age and, how everything that they do. And it's so empowering for these kids to grow up with that mindset so that they're not adults struggling to just deal with failure and deal with, issues that come their way and be more resilient in a healthy way.
And I know we mentioned earlier, I had the privilege of being on your show. Tell us, for the audience who doesn't know, about your podcast.
Yeah, so I have a platform called PedsDocTalk. So I have a podcast, which I was so excited to have you on. And the podcast is health, parenting, development, pretty much anything relatable to parents. And my entire platform is not only parenting, which I love to talk about, but I also talk about health, development, things in the media that come out that parents are always worried about. I like to be that one-stop shop for anything that will provide parents with a little more balance and reassurance, right? I'm not into fear-mongering. I'm not into shame for parents as well, not just for my children, but fellow parents. So when I talk about material and talk about content, it's in a very understanding the development of a child. Even when we talk about screens, I take into development of a child, I take into consideration, I know how situations are, I know how everyone has different resources, but how can we make better choices for our family, for our children, understanding the information and resources we have. And so it's such a joy filler, a joy sparker, like I call it. I call it my third baby, or I guess my fourth baby if you think about my dog, because it is such a pride and joy to be able to help so many parents feel less upset about the parenting journey and actually enjoy it. My hope is that parents can actually find joy in the parenting experience like you have, right? That it's going to be hard. It's not easy. I have two small ones, but that where can you find the joy? What is sparking passion and purpose for you in this relationship, which is one of the most incredible relationships, the parent-child relationship. And we are empowered and have this incredible power to raise these beautiful children. And I want parents to know that they are capable and confident to do so.
It's amazing. What's something that you're grateful for?
I'm grateful for these opportunities, by the way. I'm very grateful for this. I have reflected so much on my life this past year, and I'm the happiest I've been in a very long time. The pandemic really took a toll on me from a mental health perspective, birth trauma, all of that. And I am, for the first time, just very at peace and very grateful for my children. Very grateful for the opportunities I get to help other parents. And of course, I have my family and my husband, and all that is obviously there. But to be able to impart knowledge and help others is probably one of the biggest things I'm grateful for in this world, because I know it's going to leave a legacy after I'm gone. I know that my children are going to be here to carry on this love that I have for the world. And it's true love. Like, I am a lover, not a fighter. Like, I want people to feel more love in this world, even if we disagree on religion, politics, how we want to raise our kids, that we're not angry at each other. And so I'm grateful for that mindset. I'm grateful for a mother who's taught me that, to love and not hate. And I'm hopefully grateful to continue to impart that knowledge to the world and my kids.
I really, really appreciate that. I'll tell you, and we always talk about, the name of the show is Common Denominator. And we had a guest before, and constantly we're having guests. And what is that common denominator thread? It's basically to really impact in a positive way the guests across the boards from all walks of life. That's where they find their peace, is to give true from their heart, things tangible that really, for the people that want to take it, they, with no strings attached, that's where the peace comes, and there's no hatred in the heart. It's only just love, and so it's great. I'm so grateful actually to be hosting the show and guests, and so it's really great. On that note, what would you say is the common denominator that makes a great parent?
I think the biggest thing for me is finding the way that you're going to find the most joy in this experience. And I say this as someone who's gone through really hard times. Like, I don't expect myself to be happy in that moment. I don't expect myself, but the common denominator for me is having that insight into knowing when you're not okay, knowing when you are okay, and celebrating all of it, right? So we tend to get upset at ourselves if we're not in a good physical, mental state and say, well, I should be working out, or I should be doing this. There was 2 years of my life that I could not be consistent with working out and handling my mental health. And now I am, right? Because life has worked out that way. So not getting upset at ourselves, not beating ourselves up, and then celebrating ourselves. Like, we tend to just not want to celebrate ourselves, especially women. I don't know if men do, but I know like that with all of my women friends, when we do something great, it seems to be this sort of like, well, I know, like, in a disclaimer, but celebrate. Like, I recently reached a big milestone on my social media followers, and I was like, oh, I don't want to really talk about it. And then my mom was the one who was like, Mona, this is a big deal. Like, I need you to know that this is a big deal. And it was my mother who said that. And I was like, you're right. She's like, you should celebrate. Take the day and celebrate. Be excited about it. Like, celebrate the hard work that you've put in. Because I know that you're not a cocky person. I know that you're just a hardworking person. Celebrate yourself. And it meant so much coming from my mom, who, as we were growing up, was more of that, okay, well, don't get too excited. My dad was very trying to always put us down a little bit, like, be humble, right? Like, you can't get too in your head a little bit. And in the flip side, I never learned how to celebrate myself. And so I want parents, the common denominator, to find that joy. Celebrate yourself, but know and be okay with the times that are not easy. And don't be upset at yourself, but find where you're going to go to turn for help. Is it a partner? Is it a therapist? Is it a hired help? Is it a grandparent? You can't do this thing alone. And understanding that, your limitations and your strengths and weaknesses is what's going to make you a confident, amazing parent.
I'll tell you something, being proud of yourself and your accomplishments. Otherwise, how does the brain know? Otherwise, you're just on this hamster wheel forever, and no, you should.
We got to celebrate our kids the same way, right?
Yes.
Like, my son learned how to trace. And you may sit there and be like, big deal, tracing. But to a 4.5-year-old, tracing is a very big deal. And it's not like I'm rolling out a red carpet and being like, okay, let's have a huge dinner party. But I did tell him, I was like, I'm very proud of you. You learned how to trace. That's huge. And it's those little moments that you see his eyes light up, and now he wants to learn more. Right? He wants to trace. He wants to learn how to write his name because he hears his parent. And I say that because I I know not only as a parent is that important, but I know a lot of people listening may not have gotten that, right? That celebrate self, understand your limitations, know when you need help, because that's what brings us peace and joy when we know we're not alone in this journey. You cannot do parenting alone. You very well know that. It's not a single job. It's you, it's a partner, it's all the people that come into your world that lift you up and make you feel like I can do this, like I can do anything else in my life.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Mona. It's really been fantastic. What's some way if people want to learn more about you, follow you on social, how would they do that?
It was such a pleasure. I'm so happy that you have this experience for me to come here. It was awesome. And for people to stay connected, PedsDocTalk.com is my website, or follow me on Instagram, same handle, PedsDocTalk. And then I have my podcast, the PedsDocTalk podcast. But the website and Instagram, you'll be able to find all the resources I have, and just join the community to be uplifted and just feel like you're not doing a bad job as a parent.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Mona. Next week, we chat with Jim DeOrio. Jim is a former FBI special agent in charge, and he's currently the CEO of J3 Global, an international crisis and security firm. He'll share his experience being in New York City on 9/11 and the lessons he learned that day. It should be a fascinating conversation about national security, past and present. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, we'd be grateful for a like, share, and subscribe. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, feel free to leave a rating and review. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you again soon.